there's another. So that's not straight away. That's cut off inches of the. One, two, three. Good to go? Hello, 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 hello. Hi there, everyone. If everyone can take their seats, that would be marvelous. We're going to get going. We're slightly late, but I know it's a hot day and everyone's busy and the traffic has been, as Brussels often can be, so we will get moving. Firstly, I should introduce myself. I'm Jack Parrock, the Bureau Chief for Feature Story News in Brussels. I'm a journalist. I've covered a lot of refugee issues in my time, both here in Brussels and around the world. And I'm honored to be asked to join this event for G-100, making refugee voices heard. Now, a couple of pieces of sort of housekeeping. The first one that everybody needs to know is the hashtag, which is New Voices for EU, with a 4 as a sort of numerical 4. The second thing is a bit of a program of the evening that we will go through. We're going to have first a couple of introductory comments from some of the guys that run this project, the G-100 project, and some of the people that are involved in it as well. Then we're going to move on to a discussion about entering higher education for refugees and also entering the democratic process, which I think obviously everybody who's come to this event will have an interest in looking into. So I won't speak for too long. Oh, one final piece of housekeeping. Welcome to everybody who is following us live on the internet, on the cameras here and here. You can follow, if you're following presumably on the Global Progressive Forum or on the S&D Group's Facebook, the Global Progressive Forum Facebook, the other way around, and the Twitter, YouTube, sorry, is the S&D Group. I apologize, sorry, I've mixed that up. Without further ado, I won't hold the microphone for too long this evening, because what we want to do is get to speak to the people that this really affects. And the first person we're going to hear from is one of the founders of G100, I am. So I'll pass over the microphone to him.
Thank you, Jack, for the great introduction. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our conference. First of all, I want to thank our speakers and our great discussants for their time. I want also to thank the great team that was so busy during the last few weeks organizing this important event. Last but not the least, I want to thank my colleagues, Lina and Ula, where are they? They are here, who are joining us from Berlin, and Wajdi, who is joining us from Strasbourg in order to share us, in order to bring their thoughts and share their voices with us this evening. Just like to share some thoughts with you in the beginning. Last year, while I was doing my studies at ULB, Université Libre de Bruxelles, we came across a very interesting and valuable book, which is here. I have it in my hand. It's called Against Elections, for the great Belgian writer David van Rijbroek. Mr. van Rijbroek is arguing in this book, and I will quote him here, that democracy has a serious problem of legitimacy if citizens no longer wish to take part in its most important procedure by going to the polling station, end of the quote. People living in our Western democracies nowadays are fed up with the fact that they don't enjoy enough power when it comes to influencing governance. People are getting less satisfied with our representative democracy style, where citizens' role is limited to going every 4 or 5 years to the polling station to cast a ballot and then wait for other 4 or 5 years in order to go again there. People demand better representation and more influence in the decision-making process. That's why voting turnout is decreasing, party membership is declining, and the outcome, unfortunately, is that our governments nowadays are getting less efficient and less legitimate. now I would argue with Mr. Van Raybroek, and I hope he's listening to us because he was invited, but unfortunately he's so busy, so he couldn't make it. I would argue with you, Mr. Van Raybroek, and tell you that, sorry, but there is a worse problem. There is a problem that is worse. Tens of thousands of people are living in our European democracies without having any chance to speak up. These people have no voice. These people cannot influence the decision-making process concerning their lives. And even these people have no chance to take part in elections, and simply they cannot even participate in the European democracy that we have. These marginalized people are called refugees. In fact, refugees' voices are missing in the European democracies. These people should have their voices heard. They should have representation that can at least defend their rights. Policymakers should have a direct contact with refugees. They should listen to them. They should not exclude refugees, especially when deciding about issues concerning the life of refugees. They should consult them at least. And I believe that no legitimacy and no efficiency could be guaranteed in dealing with refugees' issues while excluding these people from taking part in the decision-making process. The solution in our vision, as refugees, of course, may be having our voices heard, and that is the wise thing to do. Refugees should be given the space to speak up. We should provide them with the tools in order to have a better influence over the decision-making process concerning their lives. The G-100 is simply a bottom-up approach where we modify the rules of the game. We don't want to change the whole game because it's as it is. Maybe we don't have the power nowadays, but maybe in the future. So we want it to be at least more fair, because it's unfair at the moment that everybody is speaking about refugees without speaking to them, without consulting them, without hearing from them. Everybody has to decide about refugees without having any consultation, without hearing these people. So instead of having decision makers deciding about refugees without considering their voices, we refugees are coming together to discuss the main challenges that we are facing in the European societies where we are living. We are deliberating about them, and then we are ourselves, with the help of policy experts, of course, we are drawing policy recommendations, and we are taking these policy recommendations to discuss them with the concerned decision makers and the concerned institutions. I don't want to make it longer here, and I would like, and I'm happy to give the floor for my colleague Lina Al-Haddad, a doctoral researcher from the Faculty of Education and Psychology in the University of Berlin. And she will be telling us more about the first topic that we will be discussing in a minute, that is challenges facing refugees in their way to higher education. Please, Lina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the chance to be here. I would like to introduce you to Karim, a 21-year-old refugee, currently living in a refugee center. His friends are only refugees like himself. None of them is a university student, and none of them quite understand the process of becoming one. His language skills are not yet good enough for university, so when he visits the social welfare institution responsible for him, he's often offered a job as a supermarket worker. He knows with the current political trends that his dream of becoming a university student is highly unlikely. So based on the findings of the G-100 workshop in Amsterdam, higher education, access to higher education was highlighted as one of the main concerns of refugee participants. They all have skills, they all have potential, and they all have a dream for an education. But do we dare to give them a chance to learn, to contribute, and to lead? I will give the floor now to my colleague, Ola Sulaiman, a medical student at Charité Berlin, who will introduce us to the second topic of the evening.
Good evening, and thank you. Well, today, refugees have only limited possibilities to participate in democratic life in the society where they live. Well, long story short, if you're a refugee or an asylum seeker living in a European country, you don't have the right to vote for the speed limit in your neighborhood, in the country where you live, work, pay taxes, and build your future. In some countries, you may have access to local elections after 5 years, but this is also about time you might have the right to become a European citizen and not a refugee anymore. Refugees are poorly represented in the process of making decisions, even the ones that concern them, and they are not expected to participate. Integration courses would focus all about waste sorting and tax paying, but wouldn't cover or focus on information regarding democratic participation of refugees. They encounter a lack of information and a fear of expressing their opinions. Their freedom of expression is limited because it sounds like luxury to think about your role in politics while you have to concentrate on your existential uncertainties, such as unstable residential permits, food, housing, health, and long waiting periods to access the labor market. That being said, refugees will not think of themselves as potential contributors in the democratic life, and they will not even think that they could have a role to play in political life. What needs to be on the table today is not only how can a person contribute to the society through work, education, attending school, and paying taxes, but also how to open channels that enable fully exercising a person's rights. However, refugees can be active in this process. That's why the second topic of the G-100 is engaging refugees to take part actively in European democracy. Thank you.
Oh. There we go. Thank you so much to Ayam, Ula, and Lina for introducing our topic. Very, very important topic and very insightful. Now, before I introduce our speakers, we have 4 policy makers, decision makers here on our panel that we're going to discuss these 2 major issues with, along with a set of discussants on either side of the stage. We're going to watch a video about the workshop that took place discussing, engaging refugees in these issues, about what it means to them. And there's been 20 policy recommendations, essentially, that have been come up with as a result of the workshop. We'll take a look at what those policy recommendations are in a while. But firstly, let's, if we can cue up the video, and we'll take a look at that.
What we want is to come about with solutions. So how do you think that you could have a stronger voice in participating in democracy?
Sometimes you have the language qualification, but you don't have the specific academic language qualification needed for the degree you want to attend.
You need to be with the community you live with, a part of this community, and to be participate in this. Maybe if there is associations.
Some of us are actually educated in the policy we're discussing. Some others have concrete experience, life experience. And I think that bridging these 2 realities and having people coming together from very different realities is actually very useful to engineer the way forward.
And for me, it is the first time to have a listening, to have a chance to speak with the things I faced.
That's what I found very beautiful, that there is now this project and this idea to make this voice also consistent together. But it's a very fragile voice, that's what I feel.
Refugees cannot vote. Refugees have no influence over decision makers, not even those who are making policies concerning the life of refugees themselves. The outcome, unfortunately, that there is a huge misunderstanding between decision makers and refugees.
The victimization idea is a negative. All these poor people. None of these are skilled people who can contribute and have lots to give.
What you can get in terms of capacities and skills from refugees, you cannot even imagine. And if you don't explore that and you don't empower that, whatever work you're doing is pointless.
What are the conclusions, or what are the points that emerged from your discussion?
Although we had 2 main things, we walked away with hundreds of ideas and suggestions, and like we have really concrete things.
All of this idea that I have in my mind, it's the integration course and the language.
Classes should be run by, let's say, the government, or should be outsources, as we were talking.
J'ai pas encore dormi.
T'as pas dormi?
Non, non.
Whatever that we are doing today and what we did today, I hope it's gonna work on the conference, and maybe we change the view of the uni and the Belgium system.
So there we go. So that was the video, the event that happened, the policy recommendations that were put forward. Now, we're going to have a discussion with a number of our... what I'll do now is I'll introduce our panel before I allow Tommaso to come forward and introduce those 10 policy recommendations. We're going to split this firstly into the policy recommendations regarding higher education and refugees' access to it, and then we're going to move on to the democratic participation sort of aspect of it, but there will be some overlap. So firstly, I will introduce Laura Corrado, who is a head of unit in the European Commission for Migration and Integration. So we have a strong European voice here that can talk about, that we can talk to about these issues. We also have two MEPs, Enrique Guerrero Salom, who is an MEP and also the president of the Global Progressive Alliance, who supported this event. We also have Joseph Weidenholzer, who's the vice president of the S&D group, another supporter of the event and a member of the European Parliament. And last but not least, and hopefully we may have some more speakers as well that we can pull up if they arrive join the discussions, Henriette Stober, who is a policy analyst at the European Universities Association. So that's somebody we can look at who has direct influence and sort of support in helping people to access higher education. So now I'm going to pass the floor over to Tommaso, who's going to outline these 10 policy recommendations for helping refugees access higher education that came out of the event.
Thank you, Jack. So maybe we can start with a sort of a small introduction about where we stand right now in Belgium and to some extent in the EU with regard to the access of refugees and asylum seekers to higher education institutions. Now, we know that as of 2017, 28% of non-Belgian citizens are NEETs, neither in employment or in education or training. That's a quite striking percentage, which is even higher in cities. Now, if we compare this data with the statement which is often put forward by authorities and which goes, you know, which underlines the need for migrants and for asylum seekers or refugees to actually sign up to European values, as the former, well, actually the current Belgian Secretary of State for Asylum and Migration said, we can actually already understand that there is some sort of cognitive dissonance between what the situation presents and what is expected from the refugees who come to European societies or to Belgium. Of course, it is not easy for refugees and newcomers to always understand the implications and the nature of this respect for European values. And that's why it is generally recognized that granting access to higher education for such individuals could represent or does represent a powerful tool to boost civic integration. Now, there are some initiatives to foster such participation of asylum seekers and refugees to higher education systems. At the EU level, an EU work plan for youth has been approved and is about to come to an end, in fact. And there is also a chapter in the Erasmus Plus Inclusion and Diversity Strategy, which actually supports projects involving or aimed at young migrants and refugees. At the Belgian level, there is a sort of overlap between civic integration programs at the region level and open door policies from some universities across the country. Now, in spite of these initiatives, which have been put forward by federal and regional and even private institutions, Of course, refugees and asylum seekers do face problems, obstacles when trying to access the high educational system. First of all is lack of information. Oftentimes, newcomers arrive to Belgium, they do not have an established network of peers they can rely on, or maybe they do have friends they rely upon, but the information that is provided is not always reliable itself. The second big obstacle is, of course, institutional ambivalence, in some cases even inter-institutional ambivalence, because in Belgium there are two federal entities which deal with this issue. The first one is the Public Service for Social Security and Welfare. The second one is, of course, the Employment Office. At the same time, there are civic integration programs at the regional level. Therefore, there is a lot of incoherence in the way refugees, well, or rather, refugees face a lot of incoherence when trying to grasp how they should proceed. The first problem is, of course, motivational aspects. This deals with the complexity of Belgian bureaucracy that some of us may, or all of us actually know. And there is, of course, also this feeling, this perception of neglect and to some extent feeling lost in this new system and not feeling, refugees don't feel that they're good enough to actually be able to hope or to enroll in universities. And in the end, of course, there is the problem of language issues and requirements put forward by universities before accepting newcomers to universities. Sometimes there is a high amount of documents and of certifications which are required, and refugees, even those who actually possess these degrees and these documents, are not always able to provide them. So G-100 put forward 10 policy recommendations that try to cover as many as of the obstacles currently faced by refugees. The first one is the creation of a centralized and independent and reliable information center. So this is aimed at mainstreaming information already available on the internet, but not easily trackable by people looking forward to enroll in university. The second one is, of course, enhanced institutional and interinstitutional cooperation among actors, so that refugees and asylum seekers do not face inconsistency or totally different situations according to the different actor that is in fact contacted. Upholding of constitutional provisions when it comes to the right for all individuals. Maybe constitutional provisions is a strong word, but at least of the provisions of the Geneva Convention with regards to refugees and asylum seekers, who actually have the right to choose whether to join the labor market or to enroll higher education systems. This is oftentimes not the case in Belgium and in Europe, because national institutions and regional institutions actually force refugees and asylum seekers to enter the labor market as soon as possible. Therefore, refugees are not really granted a choice in that sense. Simplification of admission procedures, therefore simplifying and maybe in some cases even overlooking some the requirements for submitting some certificates, which are actually very hard to collect for some refugees or asylum seekers. Smoother access to financial support, which is of course key for people coming from developing countries. Incorporation of lessons learned from other countries when it comes to best practices for Belgium in higher education institutions. Scandinavian countries and Germany are good examples in this sense. They're leading the way, and probably Belgium should, to some extent, adjust to that model. Opening the higher education system to individuals still awaiting a decision on their asylum application. This is oftentimes not the case, because only people who have been granted the refugee status can enroll in universities, and not those who are waiting for a decision on that. Eighth, more flexibility on the legal status of asylum seekers. Some asylum seekers actually do get accepted at university, but they still do not have the refugee status, and therefore it would be useful and sometimes to change their status into student visa or residence permit, so that they can actually study during some years. Inclusion of refugees into student mobility schemes. If refugees want to take part to exchanges that are beneficial for their studies, they should be permitted to do so. And the last requirement is a sort of, it would be very good if a sort of tailor-made career coaching program would be established, so that refugees can actually choose and learn from success stories coming from their peers. There are stories of refugees who actually integrate the asylum, the higher educational system, and they find better jobs and they live happier lives. So with this, I think this is all for my part, and I pass the mic to Maria.
So, Maria, we'll hold you if you don't mind. We're going to use you to tee up the next part of the discussions. So we'll leave you there. Thank you. So thank you very much to Tommaso for that, a really clear outline of what happened at that event and why exactly the refugees do feel disengaged, and an outline of what can be done. Now, I think probably what we need to do is start posing the questions. I'm firstly going to introduce Monica de Koninck, who's just joined us, a Belgian MEP, served as an MP, excuse me, served as Labour Minister, and has also spent a career across many of the issues that we're going to be discussing here this evening. I won't drop a question on you first, but I maybe thought I'd come to you first, Laura, just for an initial question, if I may, regarding this issue of some sort of centralised body that can help refugees access higher education. And I wonder whether you can just talk about what the current status of that within the European Commission. Sorry, yeah. Maybe.
Okay, thank you. Good evening to everybody. Well, first let me maybe add a couple of things to what was said about EU actions about this in general. I mean, we have issued an action plan on integration, not only of refugees, but of all migrants, where of course one big part was also access to education. We are now focusing on higher education, but of course our action and our measures are broader, covering also lower levels of education, because I think it is particularly important, particularly for minors, children or people that are not 18 years old, also to put them into education system in the member state that is, of course, hosting them. So this is when people especially are still in school age, it's important to start as soon as possible, also prior to the higher education. Then, of course, this can be a second step for children, but can also be a first step for people that want to do that as you. So I think that's also important to recall. And we have also issued what we call the agendas for skills in Europe, which is not focusing only on migrants and refugees, covers a number of measures to improve the skills and qualifications across Europe of all individuals, but there were very specific measures also on refugees. For example, we have developed these skills profiles tools that I think also in Belgium is used and across several member states to identify as a very first step the skills of asylum seekers and refugees when they arrive, when they have no documents, no certificates, and to try to assess and to so that they can use it as a first proof of a number of skills and competencies and talents that they can have, and something that can be used across member states. So this was just a bit to complete. Of course, there are a number of other measures more generally that we have promoted. Now, I mean, I shall say about your questions that we do have a shared competence between the European level and the member states on integration, in particular of all migrants and refugees, because we don't have a centralized, harmonized policy at EU level, because the situations are also very different across the member states, the tradition, the culture, the systems also, and we don't also want to harmonize them. But what we are doing a lot is to work together with the member state to support them in their integration policies with funding, but also with the exchange of best practices. And we have a network across the EU of integration contact points across member states, and of course Belgium is also part of it, where we are doing a lot of peer learning and mutual learning activities across member states. We have, for example, done mutual learning activities and study visit in Germany and Sweden. No surprise there. You can imagine where 10, 15 member states, other member states have participated to learn from the practices. Maybe not everything can be replicated across, but, and then another country I want to mention that maybe is less known is Portugal. And we will have an activity soon because they have a one-stop shop system, and I think it's very relevant for the discussion today, including on recognition of qualifications, for example, where the migrants and the asylum seekers, when they arrive, can go and get the information and also get into the procedure and to the system. Of course, Belgium is a more complex country, and I think the Belgian MP will explain. There are countries that have more complex governance structures, simply, and not only Belgium. I mean, but I think we certainly encourage the streamlining and the, if I can call it, a one-stop shop to provide information, including on the access to higher education, but also on recognition of qualifications, on access to labor market and so on. So this is something that we are promoting actively, encouraging, knowing that there is a responsibility of each member states to adapt this to their national system also. So I'll stop here, but then later I'm sure there
No, thank you for the good outline. Really appreciate it. I mean, now I think what's important is perhaps for one of our discussers, words like streamlining, things like this. And in the conversations that I've had with the guys that are the discussants, a lot of them haven't felt that. So I wonder if somebody would like to speak to that. And please, the discussers will stand up and introduce themselves as they speak.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Ahmad Wali. May I stand? Okay. My name is Ahmad Wali. I'm living here in Belgium since 2015, and I was one of the moderators of our event discussing these issues with the refugees. So we are coming here from the main source of the problems which have been discussed in the event. So for now, my question, we have a lot of questions because it have been discussed so broadly. One of the questions which concerns the European Commission is that I was wondering that if somebody here knows that the European Commission has a special platform for refugees to access higher education? No? One or two? Only two person. So there is actually a platform from the European Commission which enables refugees, but it's kept very low profile. And I went there, I tried very hard, but there were a number of problems. The first problem is that it's not really well integrated within the national level and the local level, because we always talk about the integration in the national level or in the European level, but in the end, it happens always in the local level. For example, I was finding programs for myself to study in Paris, a lot of them in Netherlands, in Germany, in Portugal, a lot of countries, a lot of great programs, super nice, it was in the platform, but I can't move for that. The Belgian legislation not allows me. Even if it allows me, then I cannot go because I will not be able to apply for a citizenship in 5 years. Or what will happen to my social allowances, or where I will find the fundings for this and a lot of other questions. So this is one of the problems for now for the European Commission that we discussed during the event. Thank you.
Sorry, I was slightly distracted. That was a question for the European Commission. So we'll allow it to go to Laura.
I don't want to monopolize the
Perhaps
discussion.
you can also send it to one of our MEPs.
Yes, I will just quickly react, and then I pass the micro to the others. Well, the question of the legal status, it is true that even if we have encouraged with this a number of programs, in fact, a cooperation between the universities, I think we have a representative there of one of the involved in one of the programs. We have encouraged via the Science for Refugees initiatives, but it's true that there are issues related to the legal status because the protection, the refugee status is national at the moment, and it's granted by one member state, is not exportable. It is true that after a certain legal period of residence, you can have access to a more permanent status, and then it's easier to move. But it is indeed an issue, but it's linked to the fact that the granting of the protection is, if Belgium grants the refugee status or another international protection, it remains valid only in Belgium, and this is some constraint that we have with the current legal system and the whole system, I would say, on the Geneva Convention, and it's not easy. We know this is an obstacle. I mean, I don't have an immediate solution, but we can further discuss about this. I will pass it on because I don't want to monopolize the discussion. I don't know if anyone.
Please, carry on.
I'm not sure which project you're referring to right now, but I guess in terms of information sharing, yes, we at the European University Association do an inventory of activities that universities do to integrate refugees. But this is really a platform more for peer learning for the institutional level rather than a search function. I do agree not only in terms of integration and visa and legal statuses, the systems are different, but so are there for European higher education in terms of systems, in terms of access requirements and recognition. You know, it would be perhaps difficult to display this in a European perspective, what rules are where. We do see a couple of initiatives on the national level where either driven by universities or the ministries themselves, they try to come up with a general website. Study in Germany, study in Greece is also another example, but these are only few. If I may also reflect on the support from the European level, as I have the microphone right now, I'm very sorry. Indeed, there's some support based on the action plan, also from the Erasmus Plus program, which directly relates to higher education. But this only supports projects for refugee integration at the moment. So it supports universities developing, you know, good practices in bridging programs and so on and so forth. But these are very short term, and these are really not actually directly supporting refugee students and researchers. And from the viewpoint of my organization, representing 800 universities across Europe, many of whom are very committed in, you know, welcoming refugees, we would really like to see also scholarship and grants program included into these actions. Thanks.
So that's a very good point, actually. We'll move it on. We'll perhaps if one of our discussants can now talk to this. Somebody that perhaps, Rajdi, I think this is something that you've experienced. I don't know, accessing grants, entering universities. I don't know if you can have maybe stand up and give us a quick comment on that we can put to our panel.
Does it work?
It should do. Hold it close.
So, well, my point will be the opposite of what Ahmad just said. Yeah, this better? Okay. Will be the opposite of what Ahmad just said. Actually, so last year, after a long process, I was accepted in University Libre de Bruxelles. But at some point, I found a solution for every challenge I faced last year. But at the end, I was surprised that I needed to apply for a visa. And it was just like 15 days before the university was going to start. So my question, or my point that I want to highlight, why inside the European Union we don't have a flexibility for refugee students, so they can move inside this union as a citizen of the European Union. That's it.
Okay, yeah. Joseph,
yeah, I think one of the main problems is that, I mean, I know Commission is active, but to be frank, most of the energy is actually spent on prevention and not on integration. So integration is rather something nice to have, yeah? But it's not really working, and the member states are actually left alone with it. So I think one of the most important elements is what you have in your paper is the status change. So there should be something possible that if a person is ready for taking up his or her studies, that this person can change the status, and then it would allow also to move all around Europe. So we should think about this. I think this could be one of the keywords. Huh? As long as you are in this asylum seeker status, you never really get into the field. So we should think about this, how we can manage it, and this would be for at least for those people who want to study a big progress.
Perhaps we can ask one of our discussants, another person, perhaps about status change, about perhaps something that they've experienced. I don't know. Yeah. If we take Nejma.
So, hello everybody. My name is Nejma. In fact, I would like just to question the words or the concept we are using, because I do think that there are some universities doing their best to welcome, between brackets, refugees. I will not say welcome. I think I will repeat and say it again, that is an added value for our university here. It's other skill, other way, other perception, other culture that will enrich, empower, mix our present time, and Europe is and will be with them. So I do, I think, question how we can find format solution that we have bridges between university and those people who want to be in artistic school or in theater, and starting from their desire and not from what we think that should be good for them.
Enrique, I can see you want to join in on this.
Yes, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this activity. I am not only the president of the Global Progressive Forum, but also the standing rapporteur for humanitarian aid in the European Parliament. So I am familiar with the problems connected with humanitarian crisis, refugees, asylum seekers, and so on. Mainly what it concerns primary and secondary education rather than higher education. As a matter of fact, Global Progressive Forum, we have conducted a study about the situation in the schooling of children arriving at the European Union in the last 5 years. And the study shows that the situation is quite different in many member states of the European Union. And, but in all of them, there are problems of special help to new arrivals, to children in language skills, in some cases also psychological support, because most of them come from a post-crisis, typical psychological problems. And but concerning your question, I mean, well, and to finish with this, according with the European law, all of the children should be at the school no more than 3 months after applying for refugee asylum. And the study shows that it doesn't happen in most of the countries. It takes sometimes more than 1 year, 2.5 years, and all of those children have lost already 2.5 or 3 years in their countries of origin, so that means that they are a generation lost for education. But concerning your question, I think is quite important, because qualifications, of course, and reconnection of qualification is a key problem for what we are discussing today. But we are very classical considering qualifications. We consider the others in the view of our qualifications, and we accept or we reject the capacity to enter in the university or pursue several courses or degrees according with our educational systems, according with our system of qualification, and we do not consider that most of them have a different experience. They are not only newcomers in terms of new arrivals, but they come with another experience, with another education in some cases. And as you said at the beginning of your question, this is something that will enrich the university, and that has to be considered the university in order to be flexible, accepting the experience and the qualifications of the refugees in order to allow them to proceed in the university system.
That's certainly something that I know that a lot of people on our panel have on our discussants have experienced. I'd like to pick up you, Bilal. I remember us speaking yesterday about your experiences at VUB. You're studying at VUB, correct? And you're translating, and perhaps we can have a little bit of insight about your experience entering the university, especially here in Belgium, that we could perhaps now direct towards Monica.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Concerning getting the information, the correct information and the right information, it's not always easy. We have said that, but to get things more complex here in Belgium, it's always about the two linguistic systems and two linguistic educational systems in Flanders and in Wallonia. So, from my own experience, when I got here to Brussels, it wasn't easy to choose which language to start learning. So I was studying both French and Dutch. And at the end now I'm doing my studies in English. So I didn't use either of them. But I think that's the dilemma for a lot of people here in Belgium, especially in Belgium, to get directed from the very beginning, according to their potentials, maybe, and the right direction.
Perhaps we can ask you, Monica, to pick up on that specifically Belgian problem and one that Bilal himself has experienced.
First of all, thanks for the invitation. I don't speak so good English as all the others, but I will try to do my best. You can also say it's an opportunity in Belgium that they speak several languages and that you have several ways of education. But it's complex, I admit. But first I have to say something about myself. I'm nowadays a member of the Federal Parliament, who is not responsible for education, but for migration. In a former life, I was the Minister of Labour, but in my best life, I was during 11 years the President of the Social Council of Antwerp. And Antwerp is a big city with a university, with a lot of schools and with a lot of young people, and a lot of young people who are refugees, who are recognized refugees. And if they are recognized, they have the possibility to ask money, social benefits, to the OCMW, that's the Social Council of Antwerp. And when I was their president, I was confronted with all the questions and the propositions you are talking about today. And we have organized for all the refugees who are asking support, assessment, individual assessment, but also about the context and their family. And we have always asked them, what are you dreaming of? That was the first question. For a lot of them, it was even difficult to answer. And then I said, go away for 1 week, go home, come back after a week, and then I will listen to your answer, if you don't know it now. My second question was always, what do you want to do as effort to realize your dream? And the third question was, how can I help you? What do you accept from me? Yeah? And then we were looking what was possible. And we were looking to the potential of someone. For example, we saw that some young people learned languages very easy and very fast. So we have contacted the university, the language courses, and that was more expensive, but we were willing to pay it so that they could have a faster line if they wanted to go to higher education. We also have contacted education centers for making an assessment on what is the potential, what are the competences, what do they need. And finally, financial. I have given this, or the council has given the students 10 months a year a social benefit for themselves, 1 month a social benefit for vacation, for summer vacation. But they were obliged to work 1 month, just like a normal student in our country. And if they couldn't find a job, I was president of a company where 60,000 people were working with a lot of functions. I looked for them a function for working 1 month in our organization who was very connected with their study. So for this reason, they had already some experience in the field. Yeah? But we have followed their results on exams and participation at the school and at university very strictly. We also spoke with parents, because often parents, we have to convince them that their child or their student has a lot of competences and should go to university or higher education. Yeah? And so by concrete doing, we discovered all the problems you have as a student, as a young person, to be integrated in society. From housing, from buying books, clothes, also journeys to other countries. For example, if it's in the curriculum of the school, that was not easy. Health problems, psychological problems often, but also values. And for 3 years, the European Commission has given us, to Antwerp, money to coach very personal refugees. It was a very big success. The Flemish television has made a documentary on it. But yeah, I has already left Antwerp. Now they have stopped the program, although it was very positive. I still want to add one thing, and to be clear, I'm in opposition now in this government. What's very bad, especially at the Flemish part of Belgium, is that politicians don't take the lead in saying that refugees can be a positive element in our society. They connect it nowadays always with problems. That's the reason why I admire, although she is not the same ideological background, Merkel, who has said, "We schaffen das." Yeah. If you want to realize results, you can do it if you organize yourself well. And that's the main problem today in a lot of cities, and in the Flemish part of Belgium, they are creating mountains for a lot of people instead of helping them to integrate. And I'm very frustrated about it. And there are always problems, there are always conflicts. Yeah. That's true, it's not easy. Yeah. I have seen that for 11 years. Yeah. But you can do it if you want.
This is certainly the frustrations that our guys experience, that they feel that they're not appreciated for some of their skills, where they come here and a lot of them are highly educated previously and have a lot to bring. Perhaps, I know we've got a lot of questions. Perhaps we'll go to Ula, who's not put a question forward yet. She's got a microphone. Who I know has experienced a lot of sort of cross-border and interesting things she can give us some perspective on.
Yeah, so I've introduced myself. I'm Ula. I study medicine at Charité University of Berlin, and I'm a board member in an NGO called Syrian Researchers. Well, I have myself made it to university, so my question is a bit beyond or after accessing higher education. And my question is, once you got into university, what about then? I actually, I feel like, and I don't have like a research now to prove to you with numbers, but I feel like once you get here, you have to prove something. First, you have to prove with certificates, your education, and that's okay. But after that, as the trend says, you will apply to university. You are a refugee. You will apply like an international student, but you don't have the luxury they have since they came with their own money or on a scholarship or whatever. So you will apply on their seats, but you don't enjoy their luxury. And once you get in, you feel like, well, she's a refugee, but a good one. So I'm not generalizing. I'm just saying it's still like a minority of refugees who would still get into university. So if their competences are questions, even among young people and not through institutions, if there are questions on one hand, but on the other hand, they do not get special aid. So it's a contradiction in dealing with refugee students. My question is, how welcoming are communities in universities and institutions in universities, and why aren't refugee students simply treated as students?
Can I send that question towards you, Henry? I think you're the right person.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, you may clap, because actually this is one of the major points in my notes here as well. I mean, I absolutely agree, and it would have been a question to many of the students here. I mean, would you actually want to be identified as a refugee student? I have heard this from many. I mean, and I agree. I mean, from our point of view, it's all about international talent, bringing any international student in, or perhaps the disadvantaged learners because of their background, with specific help measures, with specific services. But in the end of the day, yes, you are students, and you're making a very valuable contribution to the learning experience, to the university, not just, also for other learners that are there, indeed. You also mentioned that there are not so many at the moment with a refugee status enrolled in higher education, and this also completely makes this U-turn with regards to the admission requirements. Language was mentioned before. I think in most European countries it's B2 or C1 level. In some countries, like in the Nordics, we even have to have like English and C2, I think it's in Sweden, Swedish. And you can imagine this takes a lot of time. But again, I mean, from the university's perspective, I mean, there is a lot of commitment. It's often led bottom up by motivated staff, by motivated students, and very often also from core budgets of the university. So it's not always the situation like in Germany, where the government actually puts forward money to actually enable the university to not only offer language courses, but also bridging courses, academic skills, all these kind of things, extra services. We heard like psychological and pastoral care. And as you had mentioned, thinking ahead, I would also like to make one point, and that is, for us, it's not only about access to higher education. It is about study success. It is also about making sure that refugee students, or international talent, if you may say, succeed in higher education and have a perspective in the European labor market in the end of the day. And measures should also address this kind of issue. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Gowan here. Yeah, please, Enrique, if you have a point to make.
Yes, well, all of us agree that having right information is quite useful, and if we miss information, it's something that damages the opportunities of the people. In the website of the European Commission, there are a lot of information of best practices in different universities of member states of the European Union. From one side, to access to this information could be quite useful, because university does different things in order to provide opportunities to refugees. And in one university, they provide language courses. In other universities, they provide funding for the studies. In other universities, so the situation is so different, and at the same time so promising in different aspects that I think is quite useful to enter in the information that European Commission provide. And of course, I think that we have to push to introduce in every university the best practices that we can collect in other universities.
For sure, I think this connectivity thing is a real big issue, and it's something that it's sort of part of the recommendations to get a centralized place. I know, Gowan, you had a comment you would like to make, so please stand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise a point. I'm Gowan from Cine Maximilian. We work on a daily basis with newcomers, and we from all levels of education and backgrounds and countries, of course, and language skills. And one thing that I heard in the whole conversation was the word refugees with a refugee status. And this is something very striking, because why would a refugee status be a prerequisite for having access to higher education? And we see, unfortunately, even these days, like people in centers for years in asylum centers with very high skilled background or not, but people who have the potential to grow into a high skilled person, but who don't get any chance even maybe to learn the language, but not on their level, and then who cannot even dream of a higher education. And the time is really against these people. And if you are promoting education, then the first thing should be knowing that time is money, or time is education in a way. Like every year you get older and you don't have the chance to study, you know that you have lost that year that you could study. And people are so bored to death in these centers. And why don't we give them just a chance to at least just be in university, study in these days and in these years, and maybe get their residence permit in their hands together with their diploma. And then they can start and work, and then the OCMW is happy.
Laura, can I ask you perhaps to step in on that?
Yes, thanks.
And then also on the side of OCMW, or on the side of the social care, the social help, there should be this awareness that this time is running already for a long time. People are not newcomers anymore when they get their residency permit, but that they are maybe already demotivated by the system at that point when they enter the system.
Yes, I think the situation of people that are still in the procedure for recognition of asylum or protection status is the most difficult one, indeed, because, of course, there are in the legislation of most, if not all, member states and the European law, different rights than when you have recognized status as refugees, because it's a situation that is not stable by definition. People are in a procedure, can be granted a protection status or not. And that's why for a long time now things have changed in many member states. Member states were reluctant to give also many rights in terms of access to labor market to people that it was not sure that they would have stayed after all, because they would have been granted a status. So we have encouraged and also made proposal to given also the length of the asylum procedures, because currently people can be there for months, years, and this is certainly not an ideal situation for anyone, not even for the public authorities, to have people in limbo with limited rights and without certainty about their future. So we have encouraged to give, for example, earlier access to labor market also to asylum seekers after 6 months, and some member states, they give it after 3 months, or they give it also immediately. It's trickier a bit for the access to education, indeed. So I think there is always a preoccupation in all member states that if you provide too many rights, including on access to higher education, to people whose status is not certain, that can act as a pull factor. Now, this is not really demonstrated as such, but there is a political reluctance to do so. So there is a difference in status between people that are waiting for a decision and people that have a recognized status, and then they are generally have equal treatment about access to education, about access to labor market. There can be some limitations in certain benefits, but in general, there's equal treatment. So it's a matter of fact, and the reasons are political also. It's not by chance. If I may, I wanted to add something that the previous speaker had mentioned about the politicians in general not really having the courage to defend active policies on integration, which is true, and this is something that even countries that are investing massively in integration, like Germany, and indeed Mrs. Merkel had been very courageous. Now she's in a weaker position, I think, within her own country. But I mean, they're investing massively, but this is really kept sort of low profile. I mean, not really advertised because it's not good, or because there is a fear of the perception in the public opinion in the citizens versus the non-citizens that this is perceived badly, as if this would be something taken away from other investments in the countries. But on this, I would like to say, and that I have left some copies in the entrance of a Eurobarometer, a survey that we have carried out on integration across European countries, where indeed, even if there are a lot of misperceptions about migrants and refugees, about numbers, about whether they're staying legally or illegally and so on, most of the European citizens across all member states with variations, 70% or more in some member states, agree that it is a necessary investment for the people that are here, that can contribute to the society. We need to invest on integration. So I mean, I think there is also a misperception from the politicians of what their citizens might think about this. So I think the cohesion of our societies is the interest of everybody, of all of us. And we are all part of the society. So I think there is a lack of courage in the political class. And I think in the Commission, at least, I mean, my unit is working really actively on integration. Maybe we don't do enough. And I agree this is maybe not the major focus, but we are trying to promote also positive discourse about migration in general, but also about integration as a necessity or something good for all of us. But it's a minority voice, this I acknowledge. And it's a mistake, because I think everybody realizes that this is necessary. I mean, we all want people, I mean, our neighbors that can work, can go to school, send their children to school, and be part of the society. So I think there's a lot to do there, but yeah, I don't know if you want to add something as politicians.
Just want to add that in this respect, Commission, majority of the Parliament, majority of the citizens, we are in one side, and the member states' governments are on the other side.
Yeah, I think there is a political point about this, and we should see that. As I said, prevention is the idea in the background. I'm not a pessimist, but let me be a little bit negative. Yeah? I think most of the member states are not interested in integration. They need the fact that people are not integrated because it works for their fear model. Yeah? And if migrants are not integrated, so they can say they are the enemies, we protect you. So this is the kind of business model which, political business model which started a year ago. And to be frank, I don't think Angela Merkel was very courageous. She was just driven by the whole developments. And I really believe that integration is a very important aspect for every society, and we can really become richer. I mean, the country I'm coming from, when I was younger, we had 7 million people, and everybody said, we will go back to 6 million. Now we have nearly 9 million. It's because of migration. And Austria is successful because of migration. But nobody wants to take this point because people think there is something special, whatever. Yeah? So I really believe we should develop the positive argument about integration. And it's a crime if people lose times of their life. If you look, for instance, to Lebanon, there were 2012, 500,000 children, 100,000 went to school, and the situation has not improved. What happened to these people? They lost years of their lives, and so this is, I think this is the point. We should really be very fast. And just let me come to your point that you said, it is important that we are regarded as students. Yes. And it should be, so that there's this point of status change is important for this, because otherwise you cannot become just a student. The only problem is that you don't have the money for it. So we have to think about schemes for scholarship, and we should be very, very generous in this. And I don't see this at all. Nobody is really interested to invest in this. And this is a crime, and this is stupid, and it's endangering our future.
Yeah. So we're going to move to Caroline. I'm going to start asking everyone. There's a lot of people now want to continue talking, and we're running out of time. So we're going to do, if this were a game show, it would be the quick fire round. So let's introduce our points pretty quickly, and we'll try and get them going to our panel speakers, so that, because eventually we're going to have to move on to another big discussion, which is obviously moving on to the discussion about democratic participation. So Caroline, if you can ask your question, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Caroline Sundberg. I'm the Vice President of European Students' Union. So those lucky few that managed to become students already. Not the ones that are standing outside the systems or not recognizing the system and having the student status. And of course, we're not talking about only refugees, we're talking about everyone that's standing outside because of the overly complicated bureaucratic systems. We have a publication that we released 1 year ago. It is called Refugees Welcome. It's only about recognition of diplomas, so the papers, that you actually have the paper in your hand. Is that really how we want to have the system working as well? Because it's blocking people from and having them having to wait for extreme amounts of years and time before coming into practice. Reading the recommendations that you've done for this wonderful 10 recommendations, I said, yes, it looks like something that our policy could have been written by, and I encouraged you to demand even more. And certainly, I would encourage you to even more demand from the national governments, because there is a block. And there is also a blockade when it comes to the possibility to stay in the countries and work there. Because even if you might graduate afterwards, you may make the entry into higher education in the new country. What about afterwards? Like the labor market still discriminates. That we cannot be saying that it isn't. It is. For people that not only looking like me will make it into the labor market, but everybody will be able to accept it. So think about that one as well, and that is a great opportunity then to make sure that you can actually participate in the mobility programs as any other student, as well as be able to have the smooth exit to the labor market afterwards. And I think I should leave the floor to someone else, because there was quite many.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a great point, but sort of perhaps without a question. So maybe we can move on to a more sort of direct question, which I know Fatima behind was perhaps looking to ask.
Hi, I'm Fatima. I'm Maximilian volunteer. So my question is, you said that it's really important for the integration to do it. So my question is, like, if you want to do the integration, you have to finish the level 2 of the language here in Belgium. But sometimes it's hard for some people, for the asylum seekers, to go to the second level, and they want to do it, the integration, and they say you must do it. And even though you can do it in other languages, like your own mother language or English or in other language, so they tell you, like, you have to do it or you have to finish the level 2. And it's hard for them. So my question is, how do we overcome with that?
I think that one's perhaps for you, Monica. Perhaps you can pick up on that. I don't know where the microphone is.
Yeah, in Flanders we have a very good education system, but it's too strict. That's a big problem. Yeah, and it's quite difficult if you don't speak Flemish or Dutch, the official language, to change levels. And that's one of the reasons that they put you in a lower degree. Although, if you have a good school, they can organize on personal initiative some special way or trajectory for yourself. Yeah. And in some schools they do it, in others not. If they have a lot of refugees in the schools, they are not so willing to organize it. If you are in elite school, and there is one teacher who takes care of you, you can be lucky that they are helping you on different levels. But it's the decision of the school.
Please, yeah, I'm going to come to some audience questions shortly after, specifically on that. I'll bring you the microphone.
I recognize that because I have also problems with languages. I'm very good in mathematics, yeah? And I admit that it's quite difficult, although I think from some level, you can, for example, at the VUB, the Flemish part of the Brussels University, you can study, for example, in English. Yeah, but I don't think you can study in Arabic. That's impossible.
Would you like to? So we're going to, I'll go to Ahmed quickly. We've got a lot of people that are raising their hands now, but I know he's been keen to speak for some time. And we are going to take some questions from the audience shortly as well. If I can ask everyone to be super quick so that we
Thank you very much. I will go super quick, and I'm sure it's super important also. So I have 4 points. The first point, yeah.
Super quick with 4 points.
Okay, because these points are collected from the first event, and it is a must to deliver them here for our speakers. The first thing, I wanted to just have a very short comment on Mr. Enrique's thing that there is some information in the website of the European Commission. Yes, we agree. We also discussed that there are information, but for other problems, when refugees have a problem, they direct them to an organization, then this organization will resolve this problem. So what we want from this centralized information center to have, at least within any other organization, a body or some people to just help refugees with this problem. That could be super helpful. That is one of the comments. Then the other thing is, we are very lucky that we have here people from the European Parliament and Belgian government, because we will narrow it down and just bring up the legal issue that refugees have. So there are 2 or 3 legal problems that I want to know your opinion about it, whether European Parliament and also the Belgian Parliament have a kind of co-work on this. The first thing is, well, I heard several times that once the refugees have their documents, they have almost equal treatment as the native citizens. But there is one problem. The day you receive your refugee status, at the same day you receive another document which says that you are not allowed to benefit anything from your previous citizenship. But in this refugee citizenship, your citizenship is written a refugee. And if I want to apply for a university, or I want to apply for whatever opportunity, there is not such a thing as nationality refugee. In my document, it is written refugee, and I'm not allowed to use my previous nationality and also not allowed to use a Belgian one.
No,
so it is a major problem that we always have this. So I don't know what could be, how could you define a refugee citizenship? This is one point. The other thing is, in Belgium, we have a royal decree of 1977 where it is vastly implemented in the universities that refugees, even recognized refugees, are not allowed to benefit from social allowance in the first year of their residence, which means that if you are a recognized refugee, you have to wait for 1 entire year and then apply for a university. I don't know what is the reason behind that. Maybe you have something for that, but it is really demotivating refugees, especially those who who want to go one. And during this 1 year, you mentioned about the labor market opportunities. Labor market in Belgium for refugees is a trap. Once you're in the labor market, then there is no way back for higher education. Because once you're working, then and the unemployment is taken care by RVA or ONEM or this type of organization. And in the eyes of ONEM, a person who stops working is a kind of criminal, and they will not agree with you to come back to higher education. And especially these refugees that are not allowed the first year to go to universities, and then if they go to work, will not be allowed to come back to it. This is a real challenge which we have here in Belgium. And I would like the European Parliament and also the Belgian lawmakers to really consider this type of specific things which are really specific for the refugees, not for the other population. These are the things. I have a lot of other things, but
Let's leave it there. Let's leave it there. So please, if you can, if perhaps an MEP or anyone that wants to speak to this.
It's much more complicated. If you are a refugee, you have still your nationality. So you can mention both. It's not, you have a legal status as a refugee, but you are keeping your nationality. So you have to mention both.
But the day that we received, the day I received my refugee status here in Belgium, the same day I received another paper with 25 pages, and there it is written that you cannot get into contact with your home embassy, you cannot go back to your country, and you cannot use your home country as a benefit or something, and you cannot even use your passport if you have from your home country.
No, that's true. You need your, you have to use your new refugee document in our country, but you can keep your nationality. And why is the reason beyond? They say, if you are a refugee, then you are afraid of your country. Yeah? You have left your country because it's not safe for you there. So it's impossible to have contacts or to go back to the country that you have left.
I have been discriminated many times only because in my ID card there was written refugee. Because there is a nationality, and in front of nationality is written refugee. And whenever I go in a very, like, for example, in some type of events or something, and whenever they see that it's written refugee, they feel shocked that who let you in? Or once I was in the European Parliament, I worked for a research center. We wanted to represent our research there. And there was no question of refugee or anything. But when I was entering, and in my ID they saw that it's a refugee, then once they were introducing the participant, they said, well, we allowed refugees also to take part here in our thing. So then I was thinking that who is a refugee here? So how come? Then I realized that, well, when I showed my ID in the entrance, they knew that here is a refugee. So this type of thing.
There is often a confusion between asylum seeker and recognized refugee. But in fact, a recognized refugee, that's almost like a Belgian citizen.
Exactly, and I think as well, just to perhaps add on that as well, that there are obviously difficulties when you're talking about the wider society appreciating refugees compared to sort of accessing higher education, although it clearly does play into it. I'm going to have to stop you because there's a gentleman that's been in the audience that's been trying to get me for about half an hour. So feel free to stand up and ask your question.
Okay. My name is Kevin. I want to go to back, not to the recognized refugee, but actually the asylum seeker that is on the point, which is me. I come from a safe country, specifically Albania, so which means this indicates that my procedure is a bit more complicated because, of course, we are recognized as safe. Even though the procedure goes in many ways, yet again, some things that are very dysfunctional in my country and in here as well, made me receive a negative decision, so I am appealing. This is a conclusion of the entire thing that is going on right now. Even though I come from Albania, it is a country that actually has a very motivated and a very strong educational system. So I wanted to go back to Mr. Enrique, who said, we decide on our eye and education before we value and evaluate the other diplomas that come here. I should remind you that where we decide for asylum seeking is the only opportunity to survive from certain problems which are very specific. I am not a person who is suffering from a problem that indicates or touches my entire country. It is a very personal one. Now, at this point, I should also tell you that I have been a model, I have worked for international companies, I have met many, many, many people in fashion, in television. I have talked to Simon Cowell, who is a very famous producer, which I know most of the people here have never done. So, when you evaluate something, you should first evaluate the flaws of the Belgian system. And we could start on something that we all know, is the Belgian law, which, frankly, not trying to be offensive, 15% of that I could use to make a comedy show. Because it is that absurd at some points. But when I come here, if I am denied a refugee status, I certainly agree with the point that the gentleman made earlier, I should have a deviation once my case is proven to be really life-threatening, but you don't want to give me a refugee status. And that would be take into account my abilities, take into account my education, and try to be further and to help the Belgian community.
Do you have a question? Do you have a specific question?
This was just a statement because I was kind of...
Yeah, letting it go. Cool. Good speak. Perhaps, no? Okay. I'm afraid we're going to have to move on. It's been a super interesting conversation. There are many, many points that I know many of our yeah, I think we've got to move on. I'm really sorry. It's otherwise we're not going to be able to tackle any of the issues. You want him to go for 15? You want to take it? Yeah, go. Here you go. Here's the microphone.
I just want to tell you that European Parliament adopted in 2016 a resolution concerning the integration of the refugees and asylum seekers in labor market. I just refer to this resolution you can find in the European Parliament because there are a lot of recommendations for member states.
And I mean, I know it's not the topic, but maybe afterwards I can tell you also we have done a lot to favor integration into the labor market. Both at European level, we have established a partnership between the economic and social partners as a model for member states also to implement to favor the integration of refugees into the labor market. We have launched an initiative with the employers, which is called Employers Together for Integration, to get on board companies, and there are a lot across Europe that want to be proactive to facilitate integration of refugees into the companies with mentoring, training. I mean, there is a lot. I know it's not the topic, but I mean, I'm happy also to send you the information afterwards. And there is a lot that is being done specifically to facilitate integration into labor market, which is the second step after the higher education. And many member states are also doing a lot, but we are really actively encouraging them to involve all the actors, economic in premise, like the businesses, but also the trade unions are very active in many member states to facilitate it, and they don't see this a threat to the jobs of native workers, I would say. I have to say the trade unions in most member states are also very, very active into helping integrating into the labor market. Sorry, I didn't want to deviate.
Yeah, I'm not so pessimistic. I was pessimistic when we had the economic crisis of 2008, because there was a lot of job loss. Today, with the graying of our population, we see at the labor market that there are not enough young people. And so for this reason now, employers are looking for new people and are starting to invest in young people. Because before, they could choose between the perfect and the perfect Yeah. Now they have to adapt again and to offer education and to coach people to do some work. So I'm optimistic that for economic reasons, that a lot of actors will be obliged to invest in integration and will ask about integration and maybe will be more positive about integration. But it's quite difficult with right-wing parties who really used the emotions, the negative emotions about refugees to gain power. That's a big problem. That's politics.
Thank you very much. I think we have to conclude this part of the discussions here on access to higher education. I think we've tackled a range of very complicated issues, and I hope that everybody's had the time to say what they wanted to say. I wish we could have had more on that section. But now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the bit about democratic participation, getting refugees engaged in their local societies and politically active as well. And for this, reflecting back onto the event and the discussions and the workshop that happened, we are going to ask Maria to come and put forward these next 10 recommendations that were put forward by the G-100.
Thank you for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Maria, and I work as a policy advisor at FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, that is proudly also supporting the event. And it's very good to be with our friends from G100, friends that were with us in the World Cafe and back in that Sunday, also with Celine, who joined me that day. It was a very special day, I have to say, because misperceptions were put apart. And we learned a lot, actually. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about that. Sorry about that. At FEPS, of course, we were very, very happy to join forces with G100 because at the core of our mission is actually bridging the gap between civil society and politics of today. And touching also upon what Ayham said in the beginning, and I think this is so important, we also understand that there's disillusionment towards the politics of today and how politicians are responding to citizens' aspirations. And this is even more so the case with the case of newcomers and refugee seekers because their situation is even more difficult. And so why did I also touch upon the fact that we were positively surprised, let's say, because of course in our foundation, in a number of debates and researches that we come across, we see that there's also a willingness to democratic participation. But here, when we came into that sunny Sunday, and we sat at the table and we thought, okay, there will be questions with regards to political parties. There will be questions with regards to elections, voting, etc. This didn't happen. Actually, we came to understand, and this was exactly, and this is also why it's first here in the PowerPoint, that there is no democratic participation without proper integration. And this was touched upon in the discussions earlier, and also there's a bit of an overlap in this. And this is why it's so important that this first step is there, that people feel that they belong, that people feel that they can have a life. And of course, you wouldn't be interested in participating in politics if you don't have a home, if you don't feel that you belong. So, of course, for us, this was really, really striking for Celine and I. And therefore, we also tried to understand better how we could come about with solutions, because I also think that this is very, very important, that we put the positive tone on such debates as the one that we're having here today. As in the previous panel, language barriers, of course, and here, I've been living in Belgium for 6 years. I'm a Portuguese, and even today, I think it's quite complicated to understand the system, and I do benefit from the fact of having European citizenship, so of course, this was reoccurrent from the people that participated in the workshop, that simply it's too complicated to understand, that the language barrier is really, really difficult to overcome. What is more, and of course this is a battle that we at FAPS do every day, also with the partnership with the Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, Global Progressive Forum, is to fight misperceptions and misunderstandings with regards to situations of contemporary society. And this is also why it's so important that we fight the negative perceptions, not only at the school level, within the community of the students, as it was raised. I think it's super important. But also that this comes from the higher political level, at the European level, national but also local. And here, addressing a bit perhaps and already jumping into potential solutions is of course the politics at the local level. And you mentioned it as well. This is the starting point. This is the starting point where people can actually have a voice. So this is also one of the recommendations that will come in view of responding to the fact that it's difficult to understand the system. The system is very complex, it's very big, there's federal, regional, etc. And so therefore that would be a starting point. And then, of course, in terms of recommendations, and this is also why I came so happy out of the workshop, because we faced several challenges, but there are more positive recommendations than the challenges that we could target. So I also think that this paves a way forward. And what was particularly important and mentioned several times by the participants at our World Café was the fact that the integration courses barely touched upon on the political system of the country, or political parties, or the elected leaders, or whether you could actually stand for election. So of course, then again comes the issue that was mentioned before, the lack of information. So here there was actually a call for more information in this regard as well. And of course, information being precise, clear, and the one-stop shop. So this is also why I was happy to hear of this example, and hopefully that such best practices as we've seen in my home country could be then replicated in other member states. And of course, investment in young people. I think that this is crucial, not only in view of empowering them to become responsible adults and contributing to today's society, but also that this investment is also reflected in the young people, young refugees, and also Enrique mentioned the GPF study, which I really recommend you to read because the data is really, really striking. And of course, the positive stories of integration. We heard it also from the European Commission. We don't hear that much. Why is that? Again, the political trends. And we should be very, very worried about these political trends that are currently gaining force in the European Union. And all of you also have a role to play in this. And so the fact that you're here, that you're debating with us, that you're participating with questions, it's so important and most welcome. And then, exactly, the local political actors that I already touched upon, and of course the power of the social networks. Not only addressing your local politician with your issue or addressing the local level with an idea, with a proposal, but also that you make bridges, that you make friendships, because it's also with the power of the grassroots and the bottom-up approach that G100 is implementing, is definitely a recommendation that should be also replicated in view of spreading G100 throughout Europe. And last but not least, and this is in view of empowering refugees and newcomers, is just they should not be seen as just ill recipients of policies. They should be co-decisers. They should be driving the policymaker together with the policy and the decision makers. And this is also why I think it's an amazing opportunity, and thank you very much as well for your contribution here today, for your time and for listening and being here with us and to supporting G100. And of course, I look forward to the remaining of the discussions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Yeah. So I think perhaps probably the best place to start with this on our panel is speaking to some of our elected politicians. So perhaps we can speak to the gentleman, either Enrique or Joseph, whoever perhaps would like to speak. Oh, I can't give you a hand. There you go. So perhaps you can speak to that. Engaging people in your political party, engaging people in politics, the politics that affects them.
I think this is the most important point, and is actually the solution of the problems we discussed before. If people have no say, if they just staying outside of the whole process, there will be no success. So it is important to have a say. And there was also discussion on voting rights. Of course, I have no problems with that. I think this is important. If people are part of a society, they should also have the right to vote. The problem is it's not everything. So voting right is important, but it's also about enabling that you are taking part in the process. And I think this is in the 70s, Willy Brandt once said, we have to flood the society with democracy. So I think that's the point. It should be possible to have a say in different areas, in different aspects. It's not only about the parliament, of course, yeah, no problem, but this is not enough. So I would say this initiative is great. It would deserve also other initiatives in other member states, and it should also be connected with other member states. And it is a big potential for democracy. And if you leave that out, yeah, we just forget our future. So let's do that, and let's be more active, not only in Belgium. So Belgium is the forerunner. But this is quite a good thing. But to involve people, yeah? And if you are involving people, then people also are capable of solving their problems. And I think one of the most problematic things about this refugee question is that people are victimized and they're just, patronized, and they are not regarded, as you said, as students or as real participants of society. We should make that going.
Enrique, would you like to?
Well, this is a very complex problem, and it's very difficult to solve if we think only in participation in electoral voting. Because this is not, let's say, discriminatory for refugees. This is discriminatory for everyone who has not the citizenship of each country. For instance, if you are in Spain, which is my country of origin, if you are a European citizen, you can vote in local elections and in European elections, but not in national, parliamentary elections or regional elections. And if you are not member of the European, of one member states, if you are not citizen of one member state of the European Union, you can vote only in local elections if this is also the right of the Spanish people in the country of the foreign people in Spain. So it's a difficult situation. But I think that there is a lot of alternative possibilities, and we have to be innovative, creating tools for participation in the political process and also in the decision-making process. So it's, as you said at the beginning, democracy is not only to vote every 4 years. As a matter of fact, every day this kind of democratic behavior is more contested in the society. Society in general is looking for more direct or participatory or deliberatory way to participate in politics. And in this way, I think that tools for participating in the political process, it's possible to find, and it will be very difficult to change the idea that the political rights for voting is strictly connected with the citizenship of each country.
This is certainly an important issue, and I'm going to throw now to Tom, I think, who is a person who is one of our discussants who's engaged in this pretty heavily. So let Tom speak about some of the stuff he's been doing.
Great, thank you, everyone. My name is Thomas Huddleston from the Migration Policy Group. I want to make 3 points in this area, since MPG works a lot on democratic participation of immigrants. I think it was really relevant that, came out of the recommendations that, yeah, refugees actually really would like to vote, right? It's the first point. So I don't know, how many people here are not EU citizens? Can you raise your hand? And how many of you have lived here for 5 years? So all of those people can't vote. How many of you are EU citizens who live in Belgium? Not Belgian citizens, but EU citizens in Belgium. Raise your hands high, yeah. How many of you have signed up to vote for the local elections? Okay, thank you, yes. We have to stand together and listen to what refugees and migrants are saying is not working in the cities in Belgium where communes have more power than in any other European country, right? So if we would really listen to migrants and refugees, then we would use the power that we are given as 1/3 of the Brussels electorate, 1/3, to actually ask for the change that they are telling us they need. So that's my first point. And it's extremely simple to sign up to vote in Belgium. It's not obligatory for non-Belgian citizens. We even have the forms outside. So please, as your first act, sign up to vote. Second point I wanted to make, this kind of consultation is fantastic, but what we need is really community organizing and building and alliance building within the migrant and refugee community. MPG is doing this through European democracy camps, so to help migrant and refugee leaders build up their skills. This might be something that could be developed more across Europe. And I think then once we have things that are not just these one-off projects, but real engagement, we can do actions together. So one action that is being done by EU citizens and migrant and refugee groups right now is a petition called We Are a Welcoming Europe, which you should sign. It's a European Citizens Initiative. It's actually one of the few petitions that we have as EU citizens to ask for change at the European level. It's only open to EU citizens, okay? But if EU citizens across Europe actually come and, again, listen to what migrants and refugees are asking for, they're asking for justice, solidarity, and we support them, then actually we can create a democratic movement. So I don't see this in terms of us and them. These people have rights, those people don't have rights. What's most important is that people who have rights use them, listen to other people, and use common actions together. Thank you.
Perhaps, Monica, you can talk to this. Is this something that you feel you can speak to as a Belgian Member of Parliament and the specifics of Belgian politics?
I have the impression that Belgium is the worst country of the world. Yeah. First, a lot of Belgian native people do not understand our political system. Yeah? It's very complicated. Yeah? And maybe 10% of the Belgians can explain our political system. So if you are a refugee and you don't understand, you are normal. You are integrated. Yeah. Okay? Second point is that we had a fight a few years ago, political fight, to give the possibility to refugees, to migrants, to vote on the local level if they have been in Belgium for 5 years. Yeah? That was not easy, and the right-wing parties are angry against us for that decision. Yeah. The Belgians are obliged to vote, not to vote, to present themselves, and then they can say, when they are in the office where you have to vote, I will not vote. But you have to present yourself, otherwise you have to pay. So, in fact, refugees have the freedom, migrants have the freedom, we have no freedom. And third, a political system is quite important, but at local level, I'm very in favor of stimulating social capital, stimulating trust between people in a street, in a school, in a society, everywhere. And you have to invest in the dialogue and in doing things together. I think that's very important. That's important for migrants, that's important for refugees, but it's also important for a lot of poor old Belgians in a way. A lot of them should also be integrated. So in fact, the politics and politicians should invest much more in participation. And I know that's a container word, yeah? But in very concrete actions, doing things together, and even if you are speaking the language not so good, if you are working together, you find ways to explain yourself and have a good feeling afterwards. And I think that's the purpose of politics.
Joseph, do you want to make a comment? Yeah. Would you? No? Okay, then Saddam, I know you want to.
Okay, hello.
Introduce yourself as
I'm
well.
Saddam. I'm a student at VUB. I'm Syrian, a refugee. So I want to ask, or I will put a title at the beginning. It's about the projects that have been implemented for refugees, and I think it's all done from distance, have been implemented from distance. I will explain what. Okay, I will start first by the 2016, that the plan of action of plan, that that you have mentioned in June 2016, and I think in one of the points there was cultural integration and the importance of culture and integration, and I think now nobody working on it, or mostly nobody, because more focus on economical integration. I think that's not really fair, because it's more valuable for integration than economic, for integrating these people. And the second thing that these projects implemented in the plan that has been set in 2016 for culture and 2016 till 2020, and how it has been implemented so far. It all has been implemented as like, okay, someone who's playing chess. I heard that expression yesterday and I like it. That okay, you go there and you go there, but you didn't ask the people how they feel about it. Is that really working for them? That's the truth. And I will put here some sentences from the article that towards the next program generation. It has been done by the EU, funded by the EU, and evaluated the culture fund for in Europe for refugees. And I don't know if you are aware about it, but I think yes. And it said that in the call for proposals, some EU-funded programs seem to have adopted a top-down approach that appears to exclude migrants and refugees themselves from the design and delivery of the projects. That means, and really I like this sentence because it explains what the truth is. It is that projects implemented by the European mentality, and which not really working for the refugees, for everyone, and no any refugees or any migrant participate in planning or in implementing. They are just a targeted group, and I mean these projects working for refugees, not with refugees, and that will not really get the same result. Will have the same results as you wish, and I wrote some points.
Let's maybe let some of our speakers talk to this as well. Projects, European Union projects specifically, I think Laura's already aware that we're coming to her. Projects that are
Thanks. Yes.
made for refugees but don't involve.
Well, I mean, first, you are right that there's been a lot of focus, and I said it myself, about the labor market integration, and this is an axis that has been prioritized. Well, because of course, let's say that's one of the key issues for a person to feel part of the society. You have a job, you can provide for yourself, and so that's something where we and also member states and governments have invested a lot with support also from economic and social actors as well. So this is true,
But at the same time, we have not forgotten other aspects, and I agree that this is as important. And I mean, I am not aware of all the specific projects that we are funding, because it's not only our fund, the Asylum Migration Integration Fund. We have talked about Erasmus+, the Social Fund, and other funds under culture that are funding a very wide number of projects, that some projects member states deciding how to implement the funds, and this we don't have much to say on the way this is implemented, but of course on the priorities and so on. And then there are some projects that we are financing directly, and now we have just, we're about to finalize the selection for a number of projects that have a lot to do with community building activities, including, for example, volunteer projects, activities where migrants and refugees themselves are involved. And I think this is just to give an example. It's a good way for the person, for the asylum seeker, refugees, to feel part of the community, and you are involved in certain type of activities that are considered, you know, of public utility, I mean, somehow, but also for the community to see that people are part of the community, are doing things for the community where they live. So this is just an example, I mean, not the only one. There have been also projects about including cultural activities, theater, and other where refugees and migrants have been involved. Now, about involving them in the design, well, we are financing, well, member states, but also normally NGOs, associations, some of which they are working very closely and involving also migrants and refugees, some others a bit less, yes. These we are not somehow forcing them, but it's a good point. I think that's valuable to do so. As regards us as the Commission, we probably should do it more, but we have been trying to, of course, we have, Thomas knows it, the big platform for discussion with the civil society, which is the Migration Forum, where we discuss about integration, migration and asylum issues. Last one was about integration, where we are trying to involve more and more migrants and refugees themselves also in the forum itself to participate, to share. Some of them are working with associations you know, association on migration or asylum, and are directly involved. Some of them are part of the bureau of the forum that organizing the migration forum. We have been trying to develop, but this is still a bit under development, a migrant advisory board with migrants and refugees advising on the forum, but also on other activities that we have developed. For example, very recently we have organized an urban academy on integration for the local and regional authorities about education and so on. So we are trying to do our best. We should do more. This I admit, I acknowledge, to involve directly the migrants and the refugees in the design of the policies at European, national, local level, and also the association, I suppose, could involve them more. But yeah, I think it's a valid point, and I can only agree, and I can commit from my part to try to do this more and more, and also to talk to you. I mean, simply, and to listen to you, more importantly, rather than only talk. Thanks.
I think as well, sitting on the panel shows that as well. I think we'll move now to Lena as well, who has a question she'd like to ask.
Hi again. So my name is Lena, and I'm a psychologist and a researcher at Free University Berlin. I would like to follow up on some of the points mentioned in the panel, how the system in Belgium is very complicated and how the citizens themselves sometimes do not understand the system. In Germany, there is a center for political education, and I have witnessed a project they were developing to introduce newcomers. And newcomers is now a more favorable term than refugees in Germany. I'm not sure how it is in Belgium. So this workshop aims to introduce newcomers and refugees to the democratic system and the history of democracy in Germany. So basically the parties, what is it to have a party, and how does the democratic system work? My question is, how does it work in Belgium? What are, on the day-to-day level of everyday life of refugees, how do you introduce them to the Belgian democracy so they would have the tools to engage and work?
Yeah. We'll put that.
It depends a little bit on your age. When you are under 18, you are still obliged to go to school, and normally they explain you in school the basic elements. Often we see that at that age people are not so interested in it, and especially because it's very complicated. But that's in the school curriculum. When you are older, when you enter or when you receive a paper that you can stay in Belgium, in the Flemish part and in Brussels, it's obliged to follow courses on integration. And normally they explain you how Belgium is political organized. Often, and that's a problem I think, is that they are explaining it by structures. But in fact, they are not explaining why it's so complicated in Belgium. It's because we are in the frontiers of languages, of cultures. So to avoid war, our great parents political great parents have created a very complicated country. Yeah, and also for me, sometimes it's very frustrating. If you want to move or to change something in Belgium, it's very difficult. On the other hand, some professors from the Netherlands, they say there are so many checks and balances in the system that finally you have always a very balanced decision. Yeah, but it's I think you need at least a week to explain the system quite good. But in fact, by participating, you learn it really, because it's like always in politics. It's also about values and power.
Tommaso, let's move to you. I know you've got a question about this.
Yeah, thank you. Hello again. Still Tommaso I work at University in Bruges. Now, I would like to try to bridge the gap between the two topics we've been discussing tonight, because at the end of the day, they're deeply interlinked. In order to do so, I'd like to ask a question to Henriette, who represents the European University Associations, and Caroline, who represents the European Students Association. Now, we've been discussing, and my question is in fact about higher education, or rather the democratic participation of people to higher participation. More specifically, we've been discussing the added value which is brought about by letting or allowing or integrating refugees and asylum seekers into higher educational systems. Now, that added value is the very same added value to some extent we win over, we earn by having refugees and asylum seekers participating to our democratic practices. Now, more specifically, when it comes to education, my question for you is, how do we strike a good balance between the, to some extent, legitimate ambition of any institution, university or higher education institution, or even European democratic society at large, to have excellent standards when it comes to academic standards or when it comes to democratic standards. And on the other hand, we also ensure a non-discriminatory, pro-diversity access to the democratic practices or the or knowledge, which is or should be a very democratic issue as well, from people who do not belong to the same community or are new to this community. Thank you.
Okay, should we go to Henriette first?
Oh. Yeah. It's like 10 questions in one, I suppose. Perhaps on the last point first, with regards to ensuring a balance between excellence or perhaps merit rather, and making sure that there is a balanced participation, including disadvantaged learners such as refugees. I think from the viewpoint of higher education institutions, there are many ways to achieve that, and the activities that we see for refugees are very explicit examples of this, you know, coming up with additional or alternative ways in terms of bridging into higher education and recognizing things, offering additional services, offering additional training, and consultation is one of the big things as well. No, sorry, I forgot the first one of your question. Perhaps I give first to Caroline.
Thank you. Oh, so you didn't finish either. luckily, the universities and the students normally agree when it comes to the European level, but we disagree when it comes down to the universities itself. Mainly, it comes down to how the university might look for students as cash cows. Mainly, it comes from students that are paying tuition fees that are higher than other ones, and they're claiming that it's acceptable because of the purposes that they are bringing in excellence that the nationals cannot bring in. Though they forget that when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers, an ability to study, because then they cannot get the money. And it's in that way it comes to the dilemma of the institutions marketing themselves and saying we want to bring in international excellence, and that's why we want to do work on internationalization and bring on new voices. But at the same time, they forget the large group of people that are actually already in the countries. From our perspective, higher education is international by its nature, and everybody should participate. And the more different perspectives we can bring into higher education, regardless of nationality or status in the country, the better it is, because the better and more critical perspectives we get out from education, as well as figure out all the problems that might be in our societies that research needs to tackle in order to create a sustainable future. But when it comes to the discussion between the strike balance between excellence and the open access to education, we do not see, we don't want to say that there is an either or. We would say that the greater access, the greater diverse body of students, the better the excellence gets. It's not about the students that actually have the opportunities, maybe when they enter, that should count. It's rather the ones that is co-creating together with other students in the classroom that will create excellence. It's not something that one person carries, it's something that creates together when we bring different perspectives to the classrooms and the tables. But cash cows.
Yeah. Okay, if I may just add to that, thank you very much. And indeed, you're right, third country nationals do pay fees in different universities and different higher education systems. And the key word here is perhaps also systems, because sometimes this is set at a system level. I dare say that refugee students do count as national students if they have the full refugee status, and this is the question. How many of potential learners actually have the full refugee status? How many have subsidiary protection? What implications does this have for student support and the waiting time even to student support? But overall, of course, universities would like to ensure that they do access as normal in most of our systems, non-fee paying students who perhaps also would qualify for additional support. With regards to the legal issues around it, and not just seeing it from the university admission requirements, there's systems where there's quotas for international students, where at the moment it is debated whether refugees actually fall under this quota or not. And then, of course, it actually does come back to the question of cash point. If you have a US student who pays a certain amount of money as a student at your university, then indeed, and you have a set quota, you can't open your doors as you may wish for refugee students and other third country nationals. Yeah, that is an issue, but this is actually not something that universities can address, unless, of course, in talking to their governments and talking to their students.
Yeah, super interesting, I think, and definitely did bridge the gap. I know we've got a question. The next question is coming from Ula here.
So I was so happy to hear Thomas's point about EU citizens being active in hearing migrants and refugees, but it's kind of sad to know that you need to be heard by people. It's very beautiful, but it's actually sad that you cannot be heard by the law. And actually, I think there are parties or there are other people who are stronger than the will or the initiative that you said. Because, for example, in Germany, the right wing is going more popular every day, and I believe it's the case in many European member states. The problem is, it's their business, it's politics, and it happens every day. Problem is that refugees are a direct victim of this because they're a very strong instrument, and they're instrumentalized sometimes as heroes by pro-refugee parties who want to say like, look, a refugee has brought money from the street, like any moral thing wouldn't have been expected. This happened really in Germany. And sometimes as an alienated element. And let me say, I know you're here because you are pro like you are supportive of this, but please tell me what is happening on the European level that is going or that is trying to prevent this instrumentalization of refugees in this political conflict.
Maybe we can throw this to you, Joseph. I don't know if you'd like to pick up on that. Difficult, too difficult? It's a difficult question, but perhaps you can speak to it.
I mean, we experienced this in many member states, and I mean, the example is Hungary, where the thing is completely out of the frame. Yeah, this is something incredible. So refugees are blamed for everything, and even people do not know what they mean by this. And so elections are decided. I'm coming from a country which was always, as I said, receiving migrants, refugees. We gained from it, but at the end, the elections had been won by people who said we have to close the Mediterranean, we close the Balkan route. Yeah? Every second sentence was, I closed the Balkan route. This guy had been elected with a quite big gain. Yeah? So the political business model is actually now blaming foreigners, mongering fear, and so painting the devil on the wall, and then you say, look at the devil, I will fight the devil for you, but the devil does not exist. Huh? And so this is the game, and we really need good practice, good examples, good stories, in order to destroy this narrative. Yeah.
I think we all would have loved to have had Viktor Orban on the panel to put some of these questions to this evening. Go on,
I think my question was not answered. I just would like to know, this happens between parties, this happens on a national level, but what is being done to prevent the instrumentalization of refugees on the European Union level, maybe on the European Commission or European Parliament? Or
I mean, in the case of Hungary, we are preparing at the moment a so-called Article 7 procedure against the country because of all these developments. And if we gain a two-thirds majority, the Council has to decide on this. So we are active, but it's not as easy because you only win this battle if you have positive examples, if you involve people in a positive process. Yeah? If you have to fight them, but this is not the only way. The most important way is that to give people chances for participation, for changing their situation, then the thing will go to the other way. Yeah? At the moment, people have no say. They are full of fears. Yeah, and
yeah, we're gonna.
Just
quick
15 seconds. We expressed already in the previous debate the problem of the European Union. If you check the resolutions of the European Parliament or the proposals of the European Commission, you will find a positive narrative about migration and about refugees.
That is sure.
The problem is that when the Commission make a proposal and the proposal is adopted, supported by the European Parliament, and then we have a European Council where the Prime Ministers are representing, so they adopt what we propose, but they forget it when they come back to their capitals. So this is the reason that we have a positive narrative in the two European institutions, and we have a negative behavior in many member states.
So now I'm just going to move quickly on. We've got some comments. We're right out of time now, and I know people are getting restless. People have other things. But Nejma wants to make a comment.
Yes, just a very short.
And then I'm going to move to the back of the room.
Wanted just to point that Europe is a sum of narrative from here, from the people that are here 1 month, 1 year, 3 years, 20 years, like me, active in the cultural sector. And we don't need to be just good, or we need all this narrative to make Europe, because Europe, and to have the awareness of democracy, is to give the real mirror of what are our cities today. That is one point. And the second point, very short, Belgium is maybe complex politically, but I could understand it after. a while. So don't discourage people to understand political situation. Belgium is an example of making it, and with 3 languages. And so it's not an excuse. And I hope that many other people will get in the system and vote and be part of Belgium.
Thanks, Najma. Appreciate it. Now, I know that one of our discussants has been very keen to let this lady speak. You'd like to make a point on this? Your gorgeous child.
Hello, my name is Shamsia. I volunteer with Cine Maximilian. Thanks so much for being here. Yes, just like me, thousands of other refugees coming to Europe, especially in Belgium. We want to make it home. So, of course, yes, we don't want to be discriminated or discouraged to make it home. Yes, one of speakers said that we get permission to work after 3 months, but what kind of work? Although we have, most of us has like 10 years of work experiences, but they don't speak language, and then they make it an excuse not giving them jobs. Although I know thousands of other expats working in Belgium, like in every different sectors, but I don't know, when it comes to us, it's a language barrier, and it's the difficulty with language that we don't speak French and Dutch. Although if we speak Dutch, then it's another language, it's French, you have to know French. Okay, yes, and coming to universities, we love to get education with all the high standards of here. Another challenge is coming to our ways. We have to prove with all the certificates paperwork, although it's very, very much visible that it's difficult for us to get all those papers from our home countries. And we have to go to a process of equivalencing our diplomas here. Of course, it's another challenge. And yeah, once you get the recognition of refugee here, OCMW pushes you to find a job. It doesn't matter what job, what talent you have, what are your experiences, what are your education level, any job, especially kringwinkels are the most popular ones, you find easily, you are being pushed. And if you want to continue education, you have to have a great argue with your OCMW authorities, so they accept it that you can work and then they can pay you a living wage. So yeah, and if you work and if you want to go to university, because it's really not working with OCMWs. And then there's another issue, that the fees goes up and all the difficulties, especially in my city, Ghent University, although it's one of the best universities supporting refugees, but they don't have this opportunity to like people working and then going to university in evening shifts, although VOB has it. So I really would appreciate that. Take us with you and let us feel it home. We really want to make it home. We really want to stay here. We have been here for years, and we really want to be one of the Belgian. So thank you.
I think that's a really nice sentiment. Yeah. Take us with you. You know, let us make this place home. I'm afraid I think we're going to have to wrap this up. I know there's many, many comments that a lot of people have wanted to say. I will thank Laura, Enrique, Joseph, Henriette, and Monica for their participation. I think they've been brilliant. I think it's been really excellent as well that this has, I know it's been kind of a bit looking in different directions and lots of different voices, but I think that when we look at this problem and this issue, that's exactly what we want, is the voices and the discussions and people involving themselves. This is the last you'll hear from me, actually. So thank you very much for allowing me to be involved in this, and honoured that the G100 group have asked me to do it. And I'll just pass you over now to Mary, who's going to give you some more insights in it. No? Go on, yeah, she's your last speaker.
First of all, thank you to Jack. Thank you so much, volunteering his time. Thank you to you guys for all coming and being part of this discussion. This is why this is a success. Discussants, thank you. Speakers, thank you. We really appreciate it. And I just wanted to mention G100 is not just happening in Brussels. It will be happening in Berlin in a couple of months. So if you're interested in being part of that, hearing more about it, you'll know people in Berlin or in Germany that might be interested, please reach out to us. And then to our partners for tonight, thank you so much for making this possible. S&D, GPF, FEPS, we really appreciate it, and all of the other sponsors, the individuals that did so much, Wally, Monica, so many people, we really appreciate it. So there's food and beverage awaiting you. The red tokens get you drinks. There are more by the registration table, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.